Hey, this is Morgan from MorganOnScience.com and MetaMorgan on Twitter, and today I'm continuing the series about productive and successful and effective science careers and how to achieve that level of productivity and efficacy and success. And so one of the things I've learned in my journey so far in doing this Morgan on Science thing is really that I love helping people, because if I reflect back on my own career, I really struggled. I had a lot of challenges that I faced, and I had very little hand-holding along the way, very little in the way of guidance, so getting through some of the situations that I got through and surviving those, it made me a stronger person. But there were some sketchy times, and so I really enjoy helping point people in the right direction so that they don't have to go through such rough times. I mean, I think everybody has to go through some challenges in order to really learn deeper lessons. But to go through the extent of challenges that I've gone through in my career, I wouldn't wish that on anybody. And one of the things I've realized in looking around is that a lot of scientists have, a lot of colleagues of mine have become very proactive people in one aspect of their career, and that is doing their science. So there's no way that you could be an effective scientist if you don't become proactive about your science, about figuring out what experiments to do, how to plan your science. And in fact, writing grant proposals forces you to be proactive, to think about the future, to think about what experiments make sense and what experiments don't make sense. And I actually, even though I don't enjoy grant writing, I do think that that is one aspect, one positive aspect of writing a grant proposal, is that it forces you to be proactive. But the larger question I'd like to ask is, despite that many scientists are very proactive about doing their science, are they proactive in other areas of life? And I'd say some are, but I'd say a lot of people aren't. Like, they're proactive about their science, but not necessarily so proactive about other aspects of being a great human being, about really living an effective life. At least maybe they're proactive in their personal lives, but not in teaching graduate students this. Because I see so many graduate students, so many postdocs, myself included when I went through the whole system, who struggle and don't really learn anything through their studies about how to be a great human being, how to be an effective human being. I've learned so much more about that from reading books like Stephen Covey and things by Mark Joyner and things by Maxwell Maltz than I ever did in school. That's real life, like how to be a good human being knowledge, how to be an effective human being knowledge. And I think it's so critical, and we just don't give this to students at all. And it's really, really unfortunate. And I also see attitudes sometimes that are a little bit reactive in the way people manage other people. So I was talking to somebody who knows of a bunch of people in labs where their PI, their mentor, forces them to work at least 70 hours a week. Now, what is this teaching the people who are working 70 hours per week? I would argue that this is not teaching a lesson that we want to teach. It's not teaching proactivity, because basically if I go to one of my people and say, look, you have to be here 70 hours a week or else, then basically they're going to be in reactive mode. That sets them into a reactive mode where all they're doing is they're trying to satisfy this big requirement I've put in front of them of being present in the lab 70 hours per week. And so then they get in this reactive mode of fulfilling requirements rather than thinking about, hey, what science do I want to do? Am I excited about this science? How can I make this science better? And, so I know Nobel laureate. I don't know him well, but I do know him, and one of the things I know about him is he works 70 hours plus per week, and he's not doing it because he's in reactive mode. Nobody tells him he has to work 70 hours per week. In fact, at his age, he could readily be retired and not be working at all if he wanted. But he chooses to work, and he does it because he's got this proactive approach towards his science. He's very excited about doing his science. And so he goes into the lab and works hard because it's exciting to him, because he's being proactive. But I would argue that if somebody comes into their lab and says, hey, you guys all have to work 70 hours per week, that is going to force all of those people into reactive mode rather than them doing that 70 hours per week because they enjoy it, because they want to do the science, because they're excited about it. Instead, they're going to be like, oh, I have to be here because this is what is required of me. And that teaches a very different mode of thinking than the proactive thinking that I think people really need to be successful. And I would argue that that comes from a reaction. So, I think that when somebody goes in and says, you have to work this hard, you have to work this many hours per week, it's a reaction to a fear of losing one's grants, of not getting enough papers out, of, not being respected, and a whole litany of fears. There's a lot of fear over competition. I see many people, many of my colleagues, afraid about competition. And I think that the last thing you want in your career, the last thing you want for proactivity is that kind of fear. Fear is never really helpful. I mean, a tiny amount of fear, of the idea that you're not going to fall behind, that's good. A little bit. But I think people take that way overboard and get way much into this reactive fear mode of like, oh, everybody has to work really hard because otherwise we won't get the grant renewed. Like, why are you doing this in the first place if it's constantly this reaction, this thing of like, everybody has to do this? I mean, that is no fun for anybody, and everybody's in reactive mode, and you can't really think clearly if you're constantly operating in reactive mode. So what I would strongly encourage everybody to think about is, are you really being proactive, or are you just being reactive and fear-driven? And can you turn that around into, instead of being fear-driven, being driven by what excites you, what you think is really valuable, what you think you can do for the world, what you think you can contribute to the world? I mean, I think that the science that comes out of that kind of thinking, that proactive thinking of what can I contribute, what problems can I solve, is always far better science than reactive science that's driven by the fear of one's career, one's grants, and etc. So anyway, I'm going to leave you with that. I have a further thought on this, but I'll save it for tomorrow's episode. So this is Morgan from MorganOnScience.com and MetaMorgan on Twitter. I hope you leave some feedback. If you disagree, if you think that your people should be in the lab 70 hours, 80 hours a week, slaving away, and that I'm just, encouraging people to slack off, let me know. I want to hear on the comments. So I'll see you there, and